Hello and welcome to the Game Week 29 edition of the FPL Scope podcast. I am your host Matthias, and with me today I have no co-hosts because my usual co-host Kevin decided to play football rather than recording with me today. So yeah, here we are again without Kevin. He is flaking all the time now, and we have to call him out for it. But no, not really. I'm actually fine with doing this by myself. I need to watch West Ham later today. I'm recording this on Thursday, even though it's releasing on Friday. And yeah, I have work tomorrow really early, so yeah, the schedules just didn't line up with me and Kevin doing a podcast this week, but he'll be back next week, I'm sure, and we'll have a nice little podcast for you in a week. But for today, I'm just going to do the podcast myself, and there's quite a lot of stuff to go through because it's a pretty pivotal game week when it comes to if you're supposed to free hit in 29 or supposed to free hit in a different game week, which is most likely going to be in game week 34. So that's more of what I'm going to explore in this video. I made my own team selection video where I am free hitting in 29, but there are different tactics for different teams, obviously. We're going to look at 3 different teams in this podcast, as we usually do, and that's Kevin's team, it's Kimo's team, the third founding member of the FPL School podcast, Kimo, his team, and his plans, which are quite interesting actually, which we'll get to. And then we'll also have the manager of the week for Game Week 28, who will look at his score for Game 28 and how he became the number 1 ranked manager in the FPL Scope Mini League this week. And we'll also take a look at his plans for the next game week. And there are 3 pretty separate or different teams with pretty different outlooks and different tactics going forward. So I think it's pretty interesting to see all those things. And we also have the predictions when it comes to the scores, both from Game Week 28 and also the future predictions for Game Week 29. Kevin has sent me his predictions as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the podcast. So let's just go get cracking at it and look at Kevin's score from Game 28. And all things considered, especially seeing as he is forced to not free hit in 29 and is forced to buy specific players, I think 70 points with a -4 hit is actually a pretty good score for Kevin this week. Obviously, the one transfer, Richarlison to Douglas Luiz, didn't end up working out so well, especially seeing as John McGinn got sent off, which means Douglas Luiz will probably be more defensively minded now for the next few games. And that's not the best thing if you have purchased Douglas Luiz lately, because yeah, he is pretty dependent on having other players behind him to do the defensive work, like Boubacar Kamara and McGinn, which McGinn has basically done the defensive work in the absence of Kamara, but now with both of them gone, we would expect Douglas Luiz to play more defensively and not have those the same really nice positions offensively like he has done previously in the season. But he can still get penalties, and he's still on set pieces, so he's still not the worst option. And I think the transfer made sense, especially before McGinn got sent off. I think it was a good transfer in general, even though it didn't pay off immediately because, yeah, obviously they lost to Spurs quite massively. So he could have bought someone like Maddison instead. I think it depends on how much money he has left. I don't think he actually could afford Maddison, but either way, still a decent transfer, even though it didn't work out perfectly. And then Haaland out for Solanke made a lot of sense to me, as Kevin is someone that has used his free hit already, can't use the free hit in 29. Selling Haaland before a game against Liverpool, then a blank, and then against Arsenal, it made all the sense in the world, especially when it's Solanke coming in as the number 1 captaincy option. Again, he could have gone with someone like Semenyo, but again, this is just hindsight. You can't really expect that to happen. Solanke was the main guy to bring in for everyone that didn't have him, and the main guy to captain, and he did provide a return with 16 points in total over the 2 game weeks, which equals what Erling Haaland did when he was the most favored triple captaincy shout. So if you had your triple captaincy chip left and used it on Solanke, you're pretty much the same. You got the same amount of points as anyone that triple captain Haaland did. So yeah, Kevin did only captain Solanke, got 16 points from him. Also got 2 points from Watkins, 2 points from Luis, 2 points from Foden, 2 points from Bowen, which is not good, and 1 point from Gabriel, and 2 points from Ariola as well. But those were the blank players that Kevin had in Game 28. He also had massive scores from Palmer, 13 points from him, 17 points from Son, massive from him as well, 7 points from Pedro, who Kevin has kept for a long time now, and he's back fit now for Game 29 as well, which is good news for Kevin and his team. And even on the bench, didn't really bench any really good players either, but they are pretty handy players, especially Tony and Taylor, who do play in Game 29. They're pretty handy for Kevin to have for the next game week as well. Shame for Kevin, the fact that he has Pinnock. He has had it ever since he wildcarded in Game Week 22, and he just got injured a couple weeks ago, and that's been a massive loss for Kevin in terms of his future potential earnings and defensive points at least. But that also led to Estupiñán starting this game week, getting 6 points. That's really good for him, helping Kevin to a score of 70 points -4, meaning he got 66 points in total from this game week, which is really nice for someone that is in quite a difficult position, which Kevin is currently. So yeah, I think it was a pretty good game week in general for Kevin, and I think he made kind of the correct moves, but maybe he could have done someone else than Douglas Luiz, but that's again more hindsight talking than anything else. So starting Estepin and Peraporo especially, I've seen a couple of managers either sell or bench either of those guys. That was a big decision for Kevin that he got right, and yeah, I think he has an okay team for Game 29 as well, as we'll get to later on in the podcast. Let's move on to Kimo's team in Game 28, and he is in a much better position in terms of having both his wildcard and his free hit left, unlike Kevin. He did, again, I've chastised him the last few game weeks for doing the template moves, and again, he did sort of the template moves, Haaland for Morris, which was a really popular decision for anyone, especially that's not free hitting in 29. And I think that's interesting for Kimo's plans for the future, because looking at his team before Game 28 especially, I did expect Kimo to do a free hit in 29, because he had very few players available for 29, but it's now looking like he's going to free hit in or not free hit in 29 and save it for later use, either in 34 or either in 38 is something that Kimo mentioned to me as well that he might do. But 2 transfers, Ake to Doughty and Haaland to Morris. Again, I think these on paper were pretty nice moves, but it didn't really work out that well. Doughty did get an assist, but he also conceded in both games and got only 5 points in the end from 2 matches. Not ideal. And Morris blanked twice after having pretty good chances to score. 4 points from him as well. So in the end, transfers didn't really pan out that well, but he's now better set up for Game 29 without a free hit at least. So maybe he'll make up the losses with his free hits in later on in the season. But that's the only thing that's going to be interesting to see. But Kimo as well had both Palmer and Son, the main essential guys to have, and Solanke captain obviously, getting basically all of his points apart from Doughty and Morris's double game week points of 4 points. So yeah, pretty like middle of the road game week. This was a pretty tough game week for a lot of people. So 66 points minus 4, 62 points. Not the worst either for Kimo, but yeah, personally I would have gone with a different solution in terms of not free hitting in terms of free hitting in 29 and building towards that and not really worrying about the Luton players. He could have been lucky like me and brought in Sabarni, who scored his second goal in his career, which was really lucky. I think Doughty getting 3 points less than Sabarni was kind of a misnomer, kind of a weird outcome compared to what usually would have happened in this game week. So kind of unlucky there, but 66 points, not too bad for Kimo, who still has a lot of chips left and still has a lot of chances to gain even more rank towards the end of the season. He's doing pretty well in general in FPL. I think he's around 55k or so. So yeah, pretty decent season for Kimo, and he can push on and have good scores in the future as well. I don't mind his team, but if it's looking like he's not free hitting in 29, he's most likely going to wildcard in either game week 30 or 31. So a lot of big decisions for Kimo coming up, which will be interesting to see what he's going to do with his team. Next up, we have basically the blueprint of how you could have had the best possible game week, or almost the best possible game week in game 28, and that's the manager of the week, Vincent Mango. And he has joined the FPL Scope Mini League with the league called V9JT0D, and he ended up being the highest scorer this game week in the whole mini league, and that means he gets featured on the podcasts. So let's talk about his team in general. So he also did one transfer, and that was Moreno and out for Doughty in, basically transferring out one Game Week 29 player for another Game Week 29 player. So I think looking at this team with just basically Kaminsky, Doughty, Son, and that's pretty much it. And yeah, that's it basically. 4 players and Flecken, to be fair, but 3 players de facto starting in 29 seems to me a pretty natural decision to go with a free hit in 29, which is going to be interesting because we're going to see at least my suggestion for what he should do on a free hit in 29, and also compare that to how Kimo is handling things with his team and how he is probably not going to free hit in 29, and basically look at the differences between those two teams. So you guys watching can compare and contrast the teams and see what team you look more similar to. I think this manager as well has a couple players that are really nice for Game Week 34 without a free hit. You have a Crystal Palace defender, they most likely double in Game Week 34. You have Garnacho from Man United, he most likely doubles in 34. You have Trippier, who most likely doubles in 34 as well. So you have a couple players that double into 34 with this team. And not many players playing in Game 29. So for me, this is a pretty easy decision of free hitting in Game 29. But yeah, speaking more about the score in Game 28 and why this manager is the manager of the week, you have Palmer and Son obviously, and Semenyo as captain, which is the main standout thing here. Actually going for Semenyo rather than Solanke and captaining Semenyo ended up paying dividends because Semenyo was amazing against Luton, like many other right-wing players have been in the past against Luton. So yeah, that's basically the main selling point for why this manager got the Manager of the Week honors this week. But also Garnacho, unlike me who benched Garnacho, this manager actually started Garnacho over their City assets, and Garnacho paid back that faith with 9 points from 2 assists, and could have been even more when it comes to had a couple of chances Garnacho as well, and also could have had the bonus points, but only didn't even get bonus points for Man United, so it could have been an even higher score for Garnacho. So interesting team as well with Ødegaard and Neto, kind of differential team in general. Anderson still as well, maybe that's just a holdover from early in the season. I think this is a manager that is struggling more in the ranks and is more amongst the millions, 1 million, 2 million, if I remember correctly. So yeah, definitely a lot of rank to gain towards the end of the season, but I think the team is actually decently set up for the future in terms of free hitting in 29 and beyond that as well, with all those players doubling in 34 already in the team. So I think it's a pretty good team. Obviously a really good game week, 91 points. Can't complain about that. Still has a lot of chips left as well. Has only used triple captain and bench boost so far. So it's looking pretty good for the future for Vincent Mango and his team. So we're going to get to his plans, or his potential plans, my what I would have planned to do if I was in his position. We'll get that towards the end of the podcast, but first we're going to have a couple more things to talk about as well. Firstly, we're going to talk about the score predictions from this past game week 28, between me and Kevin. And again, Kevin is sort of gaining an advantage when it comes to result predictions because he got 6 correctly predicted results, and I got 4 correctly predicted results comparatively, which is pretty bad considering we had a lot of matches as well this week. Several red numbers, as you can see, meaning that I got both the result and the scoreline incorrectly. The yellow means that I got the result but not the scoreline correctly, and then the one green that I did get was Liverpool-Man City. I did correctly predict that game ending 1-1 because I couldn't really decide between the two teams. I couldn't really see Liverpool losing at Anfield, and I also couldn't see Man City losing in general, basically, against a Leicester Liverpool side with some injury issues and stuff like that. But that was actually the main game in this past game week. Pretty interesting game in general. Liverpool should have won, in my opinion. If you want my full thoughts on all the games listed here, you can go watch my FPL eye test video from earlier this week, where I basically went through all the games from an FPL perspective. But this is more the prediction, like the result prediction aspect of it. And looking back at it, I don't know, Bournemouth, Sheffield United, I did expect Bournemouth to just completely run over Sheffield United. Kind of disappointed to not see that happen in FPL as well, seeing as I had Solanke captain and I had Sabarni, who got nothing from that game. But yeah, that's probably the most surprising results. Palace, I had them beating Luton 2-1, but that ended up being a draw. 1-1 with a late equalizer for Luton, but Crystal Palace definitely should have beaten Luton in that game because they were so much better than Luton in that fixture in general. I had a draw between Man United and Everton, and I don't know why, because Everton have been pretty bad lately, and Man United have been kind of bad lately as well, but they were playing at home. They have some good players. Garnacho, one of them. If I had predicted that Man United win, maybe I would have started Garnacho myself. But yeah, I predicted that incorrectly. Kevin got that correctly in terms of the result. He had 3-1 for Man United, and that ended up being almost true. But he got the Man United win, at least against his own team. So sad times for Kevin in terms of his own team losing, but at least he got the correct result prediction. In this instance, at least. Wolves Fulham, I had Fulham beating Wolves in this game because I thought Wolves had looked pretty susceptible to losing in general these past few weeks. They haven't looked that good, and Fulham have looked kind of sneakily good. And I think in terms of expected goals, it probably should have been a Fulham win, but Wolves, to their credit, took their chances well, had a 2-0 lead until the very last minutes before they conceded, which broke my heart a bit as an Aït-Nouri owner, but at least I got his goal. And at least for Wolves, they got a win as well. At home, usually in these games between two similarly placed teams, you usually should just go with the home team, I think, with the predictions. But I don't know, I had a good feeling about Fulham having a better recent history than Wolves, and that ended up being wrong. But yeah, that's what happens sometimes. Kevin, on the other hand, got that correctly predicted with the 2-1 win for Wolves. So he was very happy to see probably the Fulham goal towards the end because he enjoys seeing me suffer in FPL as well. But But yeah, 2-1, correctly predicted scoreline for Kevin there. Happy days for him. Arsenal, Brentford, both Kevin and I expected Arsenal to win quite handedly. I had 3-0 Arsenal, he had 4-0 Arsenal. Ended up being a pretty close game, where a 2-1 win for Arsenal in that regard, but at least both of us got the correctly predicted result. Aston Villa Spurs, I had a draw, Kevin had Aston Villa winning, and that ended up being a 4-0 win for Spurs, which was the most surprising game of the game week, I think. But judging from the first half, I think it was pretty even, and I think it was a match between two pretty evenly placed teams, and you can see that in the table as well. They're pretty close to each other in the table. So yeah, 4-0 to Spurs was kind of a freak result, especially seeing as Spurs scored a lot of goals towards the end of the match after McGinn got sent off with a red card. So yeah, that was a hard game to break, though, with two teams that are really good and have been a bit uneven when it comes to performances this season. But Spurs, again, showing their strength, winning 4-0 away at Villa Park is really, really, really impressive. Brighton against Nottingham Forest, both Kevin and I had a 2-1 Brighton win, and it ended up being a 1-0 Brighton win, so kind of got that one correctly. We both expected West Ham to beat Burnley as well. I had 2-0 for West Ham, Kevin had 3-0, but that ended up being 2-2 because West Ham just can't. They just seem to stumble over everything these days. So yeah, 2-2 draw there, where West Ham really should have beaten Burnley quite handedly. That's both Burnley and Sheffield United in recent, at least like the last month or two. They faced both of those teams and not been able to beat either team. So which is a pretty strong indictment against David Moyes and his candidacy for the future, I think, as a West Ham manager. But yeah, don't really have to talk too much more about that. Liverpool City we already touched upon. Chelsea Newcastle, I had that correct or incorrectly predicted as well. 1-1 I had, and Kevin had 2-1 for Chelsea. Ended up being a 3-2 win for Chelsea in the end, with Newcastle getting a late 3-2 goal as well to make it a bit closer. But Chelsea looking better and better now. I think I'm going to be backing them more and more as the season progresses. I think Chelsea will also be a pretty good team next season. They have some really good assets, obviously, in FPL. Cole Palmer, definitely a shout for any team in FPL. I think he's the most important player to have in general, basically. Malo Gusto as well, again, looking pretty good in this game. Isak as well, I did say last week for both the manager of the week and Kimo, I think. I did say that they should buy Isak for the future because he's just a really good player. And he scored, which I was happy to see because Isak is a tremendous striker, as he showed with his goal as well. He's really, really good. So Isak is definitely on my radar. He plays West Ham in Game Week 30 as well, where he usually plays really, really well. He has a really good track record against West Ham. I know as a West Ham fan because I've seen it. And Isak is just a really good striker. So he's still someone definitely you need to watch and potentially pick up in Game Week 30 if you have the chance to do that as well. Game week, or the final game of the game week was the Bournemouth-Luton game, which was absolutely crazy. Both Kevin and I had a 2-1 win for Bournemouth, but it ended up being 4-3 for Bournemouth in a game where Luton took the lead 3-0, and Bournemouth came back strong in the second half to win 4-3, which is really interesting. Really fun game to watch, especially seeing as there were so many FPL stakes on the line here as well. Sabarni scoring was an absolute fantastic moment for me. I was celebrating in my living room here where I sit right now. I was just really happy to see him score. A really funny moment to see him score his second career goal when I brought him in for the first time in FPL after not really knowing too much about him before this game week. So pretty fun way to end the game week for me, at least. So yeah, happy to see that game in general. Fun game. Solanke scoring, Semenyo going ham and scoring 2 goals. Just a really fun game between two teams that were kind of desperate to win in their own way. So really fun game week all around, I think. But predictions, not the best for me at least, but we move on to next week's predictions. And while I was unhappy to get 4 correct results last game week, I would be really happy to get 4 correct results this game week because there are only 4 games to be played in Game Week 29, and that's why the free hit thing is such an interesting prospect for a lot of managers, including me. And I think there are 4 pretty open games as well. I don't think any game is like super easy to predict, apart from probably Spurs. You'd expect Spurs to beat Fulham, especially after Fulham lost to Wolves, but Fulham has shown in the past that they can sort of surprise a lot of people. West Ham Villa as well. Most people would have Aston Villa as favourites, including Kevin. I actually have a little bit of a rogue pick with West Ham winning that game. Maybe it's just wishful thinking as a West Ham fan, but I usually don't really back West Ham. But I just have a decent feeling about this game for some reason, but West Ham usually let me down, so we'll see about that. But going from the first game and onwards, let's talk a little bit about each game individually. First game is Burnley against Brentford. I predicted a 3-1 Brentford win. Kevin has predicted a 2-1 Brentford win. But this is the type of game where Burnley, if they want any chance of, I mean, survival is probably out of the question already. But if they want any semblance of honor from the season, this is the type of game they should really try to attack and win. And they could actually do that. I think David Fofana is absolutely amazing. He scored a fantastic goal against West Ham, and I think he is one for the future, both in FPL and in terms of real-life football. I think he has tremendous amount of talent. And I think he could easily score in this game. So that's why I've gone with a goal for Burnley myself against Brentford. But I do think Brentford, they do have Ivan Toney, who celebrates his birthday on this day as well. That might be swinging things in your favor, or in his favor, like I just said in my team selection video as well. If you are curious about having Toney in your team, maybe the birthday thing is something that you care about if you pick your FPL team, because some people do. And I think a couple weeks ago there was some guy having a birthday who scored a brace or something like that, and there were all these expected birthday goal memes or something like that. So maybe that will help Toney score a couple goals in this game. Brentford as well, Reguilon will be back. He didn't play last game, and that will be a big help for them offensively as well, because he's a pretty good offensive-minded fullback. He's also going to be a really interesting option in FPL. But I think this is going to be a pretty high-scoring game. You can see both teams scoring 2+ goals each, or at the same time potentially as well. So it's going to be a really fun game, I think. I think doubling up with Flecken and Reguilon is a bit much, because I think Burnley, yes, they are bad, but they have also shown that they can score a lot of goals if need be, or sometimes at least. With Fofana being an amazing player. So I think both teams will score, and I think it will be a pretty high-scoring game, and I think Brentford will be the better team in the end. But I could also easily see Burnley winning this game. So if you want to go with someone like Fofana on your free hit, for example, I think that's perfectly viable. I think Toney is a pretty simple pick, because he's playing against Burnley after all, which is a pretty bad team. I think Reguilon is actually a pretty good pick as well, because he's pretty offensively minded, and he can get a clean sheet. He has the easiest fixture out of all these teams, basically. So I think Reguilon and Toney are really good picks, but and also I think Fofana is a really good pick. You could go with someone like Jan Vissa as well from Brentford. He could also score in his 4th game week in a row. He's a decent shout as well, but I think this will be a pretty high-scoring game. I wouldn't be too keen on having defenders from this game, but we also know Charlie Taylor has this sort of thing where he steps up in the game weeks that managers need him. So maybe for those of you guys who are not free hitting in 29, maybe Charlie Taylor will actually provide the goods once again when you need him to. Like, that could happen potentially, but yeah, I got that as a Brentford win in a pretty high-scoring game, most likely. Speaking of high-scoring game, I think Luton against Nottingham Forest is really hard to predict who's going to win. I think Luton at home is a pretty different beast to Luton away, so I think they have a bit of an edge when it comes to that. So maybe if I would have to go with either team, I would go with the Luton win, maybe like a 2-1 win, that like Kevin has predicted. But I go with a 2-2 draw, because I just can't choose between them, and I think both teams will score 2 goals as well. It just seems like a really high-scoring game. Nottingham Forest have had decent expected goal numbers defensively, but they've still conceded a lot of goals in a lot of games. So I just think Nottingham Forest will concede a lot of goals in general. Maybe it's better now with a new goalkeeper rather than Matt Turner, who was absolutely terrible this season, but I still think this is a game with a lot of goals in it. So the likes of Alfred Doughty as an offensive-minded asset for Luton. In defense, he could be good as one of the defenders. Nottingham Forest have a lot of interesting players as well. Nico Williams in defense, potentially. You have Alanga Gibbs-White in midfield that you can choose. Even Hudson-Odoi, potentially, if he's back in the starting lineup after being benched last time. Which could also be said for Alanga, but I think Alanga is more of a sure starter than Hudson-Odoi at this point. Also the strikers, either Chris Wood or Avoni, if we get some team leaks from this game, because both the Burnley-Brentford game and the Luton-Nottingham Forest game are the first games of the game week, so we could get some potential team leaks from both of these games, which would be really interesting, especially if someone like Mbeumo is all of a sudden ready to play for Brentford. That would be really interesting to see what I would do, especially in that case, on a free hit in 29. But yeah, Luton, Nottingham Forest, I think if we get team leaks that either Amani or Wood starts as the striker, you could go with either of them. But at the same time, you'd expect one of them, if one of them is starting, the other one is probably coming on for the other in like the 60th or 70th or 80th minute at least. So maybe there's a cap on their potential there in general. But I really like Alanga from this game in particular. We're going to talk more about that when it comes to the free hit draft for the manager of the week. But I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. Can't really see either team keeping a clean sheet. But I could also potentially, one of the teams could just run over the other team and sort of gain an advantage. But this is a pretty huge game when it comes to the relegation battle. So I think both teams will be really up for it. Both teams will be trying to attack. At least Luton at home, they need 3 points. So I think it's going to be an open and fun game. And I think Alanga is going to reap the rewards mostly, personally. But really interesting game in general, I think, Luton against Nottingham Forest. Fulham against Spurs, I think Spurs are kind of like not massive favorites, but pretty big favorites in this game, even though they're playing away from home. And Fulham have been a pretty decent team, getting some nice results against some nice teams earlier in the season as well. I always struggle to see Spurs keeping a clean sheet, but they could do that if they all of a sudden run riot like they did against Aston Villa. Now that they have their full squad back, basically, apart from Mickey van de Ven, who's now out injured again, I think that will be a massive boost for Spurs. We seem to forget how good Spurs were at the start of the season when they had all their players fit and available. They were top of the league for a little while at the start of the season. So Ange Postecoglou definitely knows what he's doing, and with most of his players back, especially offensively, I think Spurs will just have more than enough firepower to beat Fulham. But at the same time, I think Fulham are just a scrappy team who gets scrappy goals, as we saw now against the Wolves in this past game. So I could easily see them scoring a goal. Maybe someone like Rodrigo Muniz, especially if you want to carry him over for the next game week in game week 30, because I think Fulham have Sheffield United in the next game week, if I'm not mistaken. Rodrigo Muniz has a pretty good fixture in game week 30 as well. If you're looking to not free hit in 29 and wildcard in 31, I think he would be a really decent option here. Spurs, obviously, options writes themselves. Son, especially, is going to be the most captain player this week by far. I think Maddison is going to be a pretty popular pick, or very popular pick on free hit 29, especially. And even if you're not free hitting, I think he's a really good buy as well, because they're playing Luton at home in game week 30. So Spurs assets are really nice to buy for this game week if you haven't tripled up on them already. Then you have the defenders, either Pedro Porro or Udogie. I think it's interesting to see that Pedro Porro didn't take any corners this past game for Spurs, so that's going to hamper his potential a lot, I think. So I think Udogie is potentially the better pick as a free hit pick. I'm going to pick him myself because I've been a pretty big supporter of Udogie this whole season, so I'm going to go a little bit against the grain with Udogie there over Pedro Porro, because I think he's just, in terms of open play, I think it's just more attacking and more likely to score a goal or potentially even assist than Pedro Porro. But both of those players are really good purchases, either as a long-term prospect or as a one-week punt on a free hit. I think especially long-term, I think I would go with Udogie, who's about $1 million cheaper than Pedro Porro as well. I think he just has more value for that price. So both those players are really good. Maddison's really good. Son's really good. You could triple up on Spurs midfielders as well if you want to do that instead, rather than going with one of the defenders. Could go with someone like Brendan Johnson if he's likely to start, which it's looking pretty likely he's going to start. But if Richarlison is miraculously somehow back to play this game, he'd also be a really interesting shout, especially on a free hit. Or if you've kept him all this time and you get some good news about him being healthy to play, that would be a massive boost, I think, for your chances. But yeah, tripling up on either Johnson or Richarlison is a decent potential move. Could go with someone like Kulusevski, for example, as well, or Timo Werner if you're really feeling up for it. But yeah, I think Maddison, Son especially are really good. Could triple up with Johnson or Richarlison if he's ready to play. But yeah, going to be an interesting game in general. I think, again, both teams will score. As you can see, both Kevin and I have predicted every single team to score in this game week. So for those of you guys saying that this will be a low-scoring game week, if this prediction or these predictions come true, then there would be a lot of goals. Not many defensive returns, but maybe some defensive attacking returns as well. That could also easily happen with Reguilon, the Spurs defenders, and potentially someone else as well. Charlie Taylor, I mentioned. Maybe a West Ham or Aston Villa defender as well, which is kind of more tough to predict, especially Aston Villa defenders, but we'll get to that when it comes to West Ham, Aston Villa. And we might as well just talk about the game right now. That's the only Sunday game as well, because both teams are playing Thursday, meaning today. As of this recording, I'm recording right before the matches happen today on Thursday. But I'm posting this video on Friday, so this will be after the results between West Ham and Aston Villa. So that will probably affect your thinking for this upcoming game week, what happens in the European games. Because if, for example, if West Ham easily beats Freiburg 3-0 and can just coast and rest some of their best players like Bowen and Kudus, for example, towards the end of the match, and Aston Villa play 120 grueling minutes and they go out and have really low morale after losing to Ajax. If that happens, for example, then going with a lot of West Ham players could probably be the play. But if the opposite happens and West Ham struggle and get knocked out and their season has basically just gone to waste, not gone to waste because they're still we're still pretty good in the table. But a lot of West Ham fans will be really dismayed, including myself, if West Ham go out of the Europa League, because that's pretty much the big hope this season. So if they go out against Freiburg, that'd be a huge letdown for West Ham, and that might help Aston Villa have even more of an advantage in this matchup. So that could be boding really well for Aston Villa. So keep in mind what happened in the Thursday games between West Ham and when West Ham faced Freiburg and Aston Villa faced Ajax. That might really change the outlook of the next game week for both teams basically. But I have decent faith that West Ham will go through in the Europa League. I have also pretty good faith that they, at home to Aston Villa, will have a pretty decent game. I think Aston Villa the wheels are slightly coming off maybe a little bit now. Maybe they're getting a bit fatigued, getting a lot of injuries, getting a lot of players that have played a lot of matches and are getting tired. Not really helping that McGinn is out either. I think that's a huge advantage for West Ham as well, because McGinn has been one of the best players for Aston Villa this season. It's also going to affect how Douglas Luiz is able to play for Aston Villa as well as a more of a defensive midfielder. So I don't know. I have a good hunch about West Ham. Maybe it's just wishful thinking because I want West Ham and my free hit team to do well, because I'm going to do triple West Ham on my free hit most likely, just because, just feel like it basically. So maybe it's wishful thinking for me going with a 2-1 West Ham win, but Kevin, as the more neutral party here, has said a 2-1 Aston Villa win, and I can easily see that happen as well. So pretty open game, I think. I think, again, both teams will score, or rather both teams will concede, because both of these defenses are pretty bad in general. Aston Villa, I think they have some interesting assets, not just Watkins, who's going to be pretty much a locked-in pick for both free teams and non-free teams alike. But apart from that, I think Bailey still has some value, even though he's much better at home usually. Again, this is dependent on what happens in the Europa League. If Diaby plays a lot of minutes, that probably bodes well for Bailey to get more of a play here on Sunday, just 3 days after the fixture on Thursday. It depends what happens in that game. You could also get another look of how Douglas Luiz is looking. But I guess this is with McGinn in the side, so it probably not be too telling of how Douglas Luiz will look without McGinn. But interesting game in general. So both the Nilla fixture against Ajax and this fixture on Sunday is going to be interesting to see what happens with Aston Villa. But like I mentioned, I think Bailey is a decent option. Watkins is pretty much a must-have option, I guess. Unless you don't have him in your team already and you're not free hitting, then I could probably go without, or you could probably go without Watkins. There are probably some other players like Maddison or Tony, for example, that you want to bring in rather than Watkins. But I think Watkins is a pretty locked-on pick as well. You could go with a defender from Aston Villa, especially one of the left-backs, but it's just, again, this is the Sunday game. Probably not going to lead to any leaks or team leaks, and I wouldn't really be too I wouldn't have too much faith in either Moreno or Denia starting. Again, it depends what happens in the Europa League matches, or the Europa League match for Aston Villa. Conference League, I should say. They're in the Conference League, obviously. Depends what happens there, but I think it's just too much of a risk, including the fact that I don't think they will keep a clean sheet against West Ham. But if Moreno plays 90 minutes against West Ham, I think if I knew that Moreno was playing 90 minutes against West Ham, I would be very tempted to bring him in on a free hit, especially for this game week, because Moreno has a lot of attacking potential. He's really good. Dania has decent attacking potential in his own right as well. So I don't know. You could punt on one of them, but I think most likely one of them is going to play around 70 minutes. One of them is going to play the last 20 minutes or so in this game, most likely. So if you pick the wrong one, then you'll most likely get a 1-point cameo, basically. So that's not ideal, especially on a free hit. So I don't know. West Ham defenders, if Emerson Palmieri was back for this fixture, he'd be a really nice option as well, because he's really attacking. Could go with someone like Vladimir Soufal as an offensive-minded fullback. Maybe you like the look of him. Could go with Mavropanos or Suma or Agard. It's tough to know who's going to start either from the centre-backs from West Ham as well. So it's hard to predict that as well. You could also go with either of the goalkeepers in this game, because I think goalkeepers in general are just not really high value this game week, so you could just punt on a differential goalkeeper in general. I think a lot of people will go with Flecken, and I personally don't think he'll keep a clean sheet, and I'm not sure about him in general. So you could go a bit rogue when it comes to goalkeepers. So maybe Emi Martinez, Aston Villa, or potentially even Areola from West Ham could be a really good option. Areola has a lot of good hauls this season, double-digit hauls even, in these tougher matches. So maybe that will happen again. Personally, that's what I'm going to do myself, because I want to root for West Ham, obviously, both in FPL and in real life, as I usually do, or always do in real life, but sometimes in FPL as well. So tripling up with Areola and goal and Kudus and Bowen is probably the way I would go personally, but I don't think that's like the best like template sort of move to do. But yeah, just an interesting thought when it comes to those two games. Moving on to Kevin's plans for Game Week 29. That's the next thing on the agenda, and Kevin has actually made a transfer already, and that is Phil Foden out for Maddison. Phil Foden blanks this game week, and Maddison plays a really nice game against Fulham away. Maddison also has that Luton at home fixture in the next game week as well in game week 30. So I think the Foden to Maddison transfer made all the sense in the world for Kevin and his future plans basically. Spurs also have a double game week at some point later on in the season, which is the only team that has that. Both plays in 29 and has a double game week later in the season, most likely in game week 37 it looks like now, against Man City at home and Burnley at home in that game week. So tripling up on Spurs assets makes all the sense in the world for Kevin, seeing as they play in game week 39 and they have a double, like I just mentioned. So Pedro Porro, Son and Maddison, really strong Spurs trio there to last him for basically the entirety of the season, I think. So I think the transfer makes a lot of sense from Foden to Maddison this week. Other than that, he has basically now, with that transfer done, the one free transfer that he did have, he basically has 9 out of 11 players starting, one of them being Taylor, who is probably not the best Charlie Taylor for Burnley, but at least it's a starter of some kind. Also has Pinnock, who is still 100%, or not 100%, but like 99% likely to be out this game week as well. Kevin is probably hoping that he plays and just starting him. I don't think personally there's any defender I would take a -4 hits to bring in, whether that's Reguilon or is Doughty, for example. Doughty is someone that Kevin probably should have brought in last game week, but Doughty only got 5 points, so maybe that wasn't worth it either. But yeah, I think just hoping that 1% chance that Pinnock starts or plays any kind, maybe that will be the best move, because I don't see any other defender apart from Pedro Porro potentially, or any Spurs defenders, because can't bring any more Spurs defenders into the picture here with triple Spurs already. I can't really see any defender being worth a -4 hit this week if you don't have them already. So yeah, I think Pinnock could just stay. Also, could sell Solanke probably for someone like Fofana, for example. I think that's something that Kevin could potentially do, because I think I mentioned this in the weekly wildcard drafts video that I did this week, that Douglas Luiz and Fofana actually rotate pretty well. Douglas Luiz plays at home, which is the fixture where you want Douglas Luiz, when Fofana plays away. So you could rotate those two guys as the final options in midfield and attack. So I think that's a decent option for Kevin. Fofana is also someone that would be fun to watch, especially against Brentford. Kevin doesn't really like Brentford that much this season because they have sort of hurt him in FPL, and now Pinnock is injured as well. Might as well root for Burnley to get the upset there in that game. So I think Fofana is a pretty good shout. Could also go with someone like Rodrigo Muniz, for example, who also plays in game week 29 and game week 30. But I think for Kevin, who doesn't have a free or doesn't have a wildcard even for the future, I think Muniz is sort of a more of a minutes risk than Fofana going forward, because he'll be fighting against the likes of Armando Broja, who's been loaned in from Chelsea, and also the returning Raul Jimenez for minutes at the striker position. And while Rodrigo Muniz has looked absolutely terrific in the place of both Broja and Jimenez, I think there's just that little bit of doubt that makes me think he's not the best long-term pick. But like I mentioned earlier, if you're wildcarding in game 31, for example, I think Rodrigo Muniz is a really viable punt, especially if that opens up some money for you to get someone like Salah in game 30, for example. I think that would be a really good transfer. But for Kevin, I think it makes more sense to get Fofana, who's about the same price and has decent potential to score points. Maybe from a Taylor assist as well. Maybe get that double digit, or not double digit, but double damage there from the Burnley players against Brentford. That could potentially be a way for Kevin to go through with this game week. But again, Solanke is someone that he might not want to sell either, because he has potentially a double game week in 34. So maybe you want to keep hold of Solanke for Kevin as well. Solanke is a decent pick. He scored a really nice goal against Luton. He's been really good this whole season. So I don't know. Maybe you don't want to do that. But I think the upside to doing the Fofana thing as well is the fact that he'll then be able to get Salah and potentially also Haaland, I think, in game week 30 and game week 31 consecutively with so much money in the bank, because he already has 9.1 million in the bank. And if he downgrades Solanke to Fofana, for example, I think there's enough money there, at least to go from Bowen to Salah and Watkins to Haaland in game week 31 at least. Maybe also even do Douglas Luiz to Salah and Watkins to Haaland, potentially. But you could also just keep Solanke, and rather than going with Haaland, just go differential and go with someone like Alexander Isak in game week 31, or going with someone like Darwin Núñez in game week 31 when he plays Sheffield United at home. That's also a pretty viable strategy. So yeah, it just depends how risky you want to be and how much faith you have in Haaland being like the main guy from game week 31 onwards. Or if you want to go differential and just go against the grain, now that you have to gain some rank basically compared to everyone else, maybe you want to go with someone other than Haaland and just wait out the transfer of Solanke and keep him until game week 34 at least, potentially. So yeah, a lot of options for Kevin to do with this second transfer. I would keep Gabriel and Palmer for what it's worth for the rest of the blanking players. Maybe if we get more confirmation now that Pinnock is definitely out for this game week, you could sell him for a defender as well. I just don't see any like short-term or long-term even defenders that play in Game Week 29 and are also good for the future that you'd want this game week. Estupiñán, for what it's worth, most likely doubles in Game Week 35. I think that's the latest projections that Brighton will have a double game week in 35. So maybe Estupiñán is also worth having as well, because he could potentially all of a sudden find his way back into being a regular starter again for Brighton. And if that's the case, if he's really attacking for Brighton and plays every single game and has a double game week in 35, Estupiñán is all of a sudden a great asset again. So I think Solanke is the most likely candidate to be sold if you want to sell someone. You could also just go ahead with 9 players this game week and just cross your fingers and hope that everything works out, basically. But yeah, interesting plans for someone that has used his chips and is kind of desperate in terms of FPL. But yeah, let me know in the comments as well what you would do in Kevin's position, because this is a pretty unique situation without the free hit chip or the wildcard chip left. So yeah, it's pretty interesting what Kevin could do for the future in FPL. Next up, we have Kimo's plans for Game Week 29, and he is most likely not going to free hit this week, which I think is kind of interesting, because as you can see from his team, he has Areola, Konsa, Doughty, Son, Watkins, and Morris playing. That's 6 players only playing this game week. And that's kind of a debate between FPL content creators and FPL Twitter folks as well. If you have 6 or 7-ish players, what do you do? Do you free hit in 29 and get the additional 4 or 5 players for this game week? Or do you save your free hit and do potentially some hits as well, which Kimo is looking likely to do this game week, and try to fill up the team to like 8 or 9 players and save your free hit for game week 34, for example, or going rogue with game week 38 free hit, for example, which Kimo might still do in this instance. But yeah, when it comes to the transfers, he has 3 transfers that he might do, that he mentioned at least. Trippier out to Pedro Porro, because obviously if you're free hitting him 34 rather than 29, Trippier isn't that important, because Trippier and Gordon, for that matter, who he'd also sell, would likely double in game week 34. But if you're free hitting in 34, you don't really need them for that game week either, so you could just sell them at this point. And both are injured as well, so that's another downside to both those guys. But Kimo would do Trippier to Pedro Porro. Pedro Porro makes a lot of sense to bring in, I think. But I think Udogie is the better long-term pick. So if you want to go with someone from Spurs, I would rather go with Udogie myself. But Pedro Porro is sort of the fantasy favorite this season. So I guess it makes sense if you want to be more template like Kimo usually is in this game. But going from Gordon to Kudus rather than getting someone like Maddison, for example, that's not very template of Kimo. So I was kind of surprised to see that, and I did mention to Kimo, I'm surprised you didn't bring in, or you don't want to bring in, or don't have any plans to bring in Maddison, because Kimo's a pretty big fan of Maddison in general as well. So I was really expecting, if he was not free hitting in 29, that Maddison would be his main priority. But he did mention that maybe he'll do Maddison on top of that as well and do a minus 12 hit with 4 transfers, despite only having 1 free transfer available, and bring in Maddison for someone like Foden, for example, or potentially even Saka if he's wildcarding in Game Week 31, for example. He could do that as well. So it might be a minus 12 hit for Kimo, but he also likes the like of Kudus. Kudus is an amazing player, and Kimo is a huge fan of him as well, to be fair. And I think Kudus is an amazing player as well, and is kind of overlooked for this game week. He doesn't have the best underlying numbers, but I think he's sort of like Saka, where he can outperform his underlying numbers, even though they're not the most impressive, because he takes a lot of shots from long distance. He's really good at that as well. He has a really good left foot. And he scores a lot of acrobatic and nice goals that you wouldn't expect anyone else to score. He has that quality in him to exceed his expected goals potential and be a really good player. So I really like the shout as a differential for Kimo. So Gordon to Kudus would make sense as well for a minus 4 hit if you want to save your free hit in 29. And then the final transfer would be Solanke to Tony. Again, I think this is an interesting pick. I did mention the Solanke tricky part sort of with Solanke in Kevin's transfer plans, but for Kimo with a free hit in 34, especially selling Solanke would be more admissible, because he most likely doesn't blank, and yes, he has good fixtures coming up, but Tony has a really good fixture now in game 29, and I think it makes sense to do a minus 4 hit to bring or another minus 4 hit, meaning it's a minus 8 hit in total to bring in Tony for Solanke. So I think that makes sense. And then if you want to do Maddison for Foden or Saka on top of that, I think that makes sense as well. I think Maddison will likely score more points than those 2 guys over the next 2 game weeks especially. So yeah, you get 2 points from this game week guaranteed for Maddison, and then you have a game against Luton at home rather than a game against either Man City or Arsenal, because they're facing each other in game week 30. So I think that transfer makes sense as well. So that's minus 12 in general for Kimo if it does all these 4 transfers that I mentioned just now. Personally, as someone that has championed free at 29 for a while, I think that would be the better strategy for Kimo. I think free at 29 would be better long term for him as well, or at least not really long term, because free hit is obviously more of a immediate future type of thing. But I think his team already is pretty good set up for the future and Game Week 34, especially with the two Newcastle players. He has two players that will double in 34 already in Trippier and Gordon, and he could just free hit them out and wait for them to be healthy again in Game Week 30. We have these fixtures, West Ham at home in their next fixture, for example. So I think holding on to your Newcastle assets, free hitting and getting 11 players out for this game week rather than the 9 players he's currently looking to bring in or currently have. If he does or is it 10 players potentially if he does the minus 12 hit. But yeah, saving that minus 12 hit, getting 11 players out regardless, keeping your Newcastle players, and keeping a pretty good squad in general. I think that's the better play for Kimo personally, but he wants to not free it in 29. He wants to go a little bit against the grain, as he says, even though I don't think free at 29 is that popular. I think it's at most like 40, 60, 50, 50 maybe in terms of what people are doing this for this upcoming game week when it comes to free hit or not. But personally, I would not free hit in this instance, or I would free hit in this instance, and Kimo is looking to not free hit and do a minus 12 hit instead. So again, this is the main point of discussion this podcast, I think. If you have a team like this with 6 players playing for this game week, would you free hits or would you save your free hit for future game weeks? Especially considering he has a couple of Newcastle players already that will play and double in game 34 most likely. So yeah, let me know what you would have done in this situation. But Kimo looking like to go ahead with a minus 12 or minus 8 at least hit to bring in enough players to have a decent team in 29, and then potentially wildcarding game 31, which is looking most likely, I think, with this strategy in mind. So let me know what you would do. Let's move on to the final manager, the manager of the week, Vincent Mango. And seeing as I am sort of in charge because I haven't been in contact with this manager and listened to his plans for this upcoming game week, I would free hit like I mentioned. And I think I did present my own free hit team in the team selection video from yesterday. But I think if I was free hitting and like basically just doing it more sort of template, more sort of safe, more not West Ham biased like I have done, this is probably the team that I would go for. And a lot of the players pick themselves. I think the goalkeeper is sort of up for grabs. I think Flecken is the most popular goalkeeper so far, but I don't think he's a given goalkeeper in general. I think Areola is still a decent goalkeeper, or not really decent, but like compared to the other options, I think you can't really go right or wrong in this instance. But Flecken makes sense, plays against Burnley, so he's sort of the de facto goalkeeper, I guess. In defense, Pedro Porro seems to be the main pick. Again, I'd probably lean towards Udogie myself, but again, that might be my bias. Pedro Porro will be the more template player, I guess, for this game week, so he makes sense. Reguilon is both in my team and in sort of the more template sort of free team as well. He's back in training now, fully fit to play. Seems like he's been back in full training since Tuesday, so he's most likely going to be ready to play that game, and he's attackingly minded, could get a clean sheet as well. Doubling up on the Brentford defense. A bit risky, but I think I would sacrifice Flecken rather than Reguilon, because I think Reguilon has that attacking potential that will help him in general. Doughty makes all the sense in the world to have him on a free hit as well, considering his attacking potential and potentially his clean sheet points as well coming in, because they are playing at home, so maybe that will help Doughty as well. So I think he's a pretty easy pick. Son and Madison, mentioned them enough times. I think they are pretty given players to have, especially if you, regardless really. I think both of those guys are given. Bowen, again, is a pretty template pick, and Aston Villa at home, I think West Ham could win that game, and Bowen has that really high potential to score a couple goals as well. He's been pretty good against Aston Villa in the past as well, so I think he's a pretty safe pick from West Ham. And then we have the final midfielder, which is kind of like the more unsure spot, where it doesn't seem like most managers who are creating this game week know exactly what to do with this player. But I think Elanga is going to be, especially if he's confirmed to start from team weeks, I think he's going to be a pretty popular option in the end, because we've seen Luton now against right wingers. They really, really struggle. Elanga's just really good, so I think he is like the main guy I would go for as the midfielder pick. He's also pretty rare to see in FPL teams. Probably not too much when it comes to free teams potentially, but he is a pretty nice differential in general, and he has that huge haul potential because he gets a lot of chances each game. So I just really like the upside of Elanga, and he's been really, really, really good this whole season as well. So I really like the Elanga pick as the fourth midfielder if you want to go with a 3-4-3 formation, which I've done here. Carlton Morris, I think he's sort of getting underrated now after blanking in 2 games in a row in game week 28. I think he's showed that he has enough goal potential and getting enough chances to get a really nice score against Nottingham Forest at home, which is a really nice game on paper at least. He could get penalties as well, obviously, could benefit from that. It doesn't seem like Adebayo will be back for this game either, so he's going to be the lone striker playing as the most forward player for Luton. So I think Morris actually has a really good case to be chosen. I'm going with Kudus myself or Morris, but I am slightly tempted myself to go at Morris as my free hit pick. But I think if I was doing it just purely based off of being objective, I think Morris is a really good pick. Who's getting a bit overlooked now after the double, like I mentioned. Tony and Watkins again, two pretty easy picks. Tony, the birthday boy, playing as Burnley away. Should be a pretty good fixture for him, even though he hasn't looked the best lately. But again, he's been playing really tough teams, so I think he could have the potential to score 2 or 3 goals in this game as well, playing against one of the worst Premier League teams of all time, basically. So Tony makes a lot of sense. And Watkins, again, simple pick. He's been so good the entire season. He's been one of the best players in FPL in general. And it just makes sense to play him against a pretty weak West Ham defense in general. So that's the starting lineup I would go with if I was just completely unbiased and not thinking about West Ham at all this game week. I think this is probably the best team to go with, the safest team to go with, I guess, as well, to protect yourself from rank from anyone that has that are not free hitting. If you just want to play it defensively, I guess, and potentially have that upside with Elanga and just having the upside of having 11 players, because most people will roll out 8, 9, or 10 players if they're not free hitting this week. So you'll get an advantage from that by itself. So yeah, I think this is a perfectly fine free hit team to play, and I think this is what I would do if I was in this manager's shoes and I wasn't a West Ham fan who needed to have Kudus and Areola in my own free hit team personally. But yeah, Areola is on the bench. He makes the bench at least as the backup goalkeeper because yeah, can't really see any other goalkeepers being super good. Bailey is another one that is definitely someone that you could consider rather than Elanga as well, or rather than Bowen potentially. I don't know if Bowen is like completely locked in the team either, but Bailey has been really good, and especially if he's looking likely to play a lot of minutes in this game against West Ham, he's shown this season how good of a player he is. So Bailey could definitely be a potential option in midfield as well in this game. Neco Williams, if you don't really like the look of Luton and their attack, then maybe you want to go with the Nottingham Forest defender. Not sure about that, but maybe he'll be a decent option. He's at least a bit attacking as a fullback or wingback for Nottingham Forest. He's also kind of a throwback to last season when he was a popular pick at 4.0 in FPL. And then Konsa is going to play pretty much regardless for Aston Villa. He's going to be pretty nailed for Aston Villa in general, because he doesn't play in the Ajax game because he's ineligible to play, I think. So he's going to be pretty secure for minutes in terms of playing for Aston Villa, I think. And he's a decent player, doesn't have much goal threat and stuff, so I don't know. I don't really like the upside of the Villa defenders apart from potentially Moreno or potentially Cash if he plays. But I think Konsa is most likely going to play. I think that bodes not well, but bodes badly, I guess, for Cash and his potential playing time in this game. So I think this is the safest and sort of like best template sort of free team. And I think this is the way I would go if I wasn't a West Ham fan, like I mentioned, and me going a bit rogue and having a bit of fun with it, with the free hits in general. But if you want to purely be like outcome-based and analytics-based and stuff, I think this is the best potential team to have in this upcoming game week if you're free hitting. But again, let me know what you think you would do in Kimo's position especially. Would you free hit with this team, or would you do the big hits to get in some players? Would you not do the hits to bring in players? What is your tactic for Game Week 39? We'd really like to know in the comments what you think about your team and about these teams, what you would do in this instance. So with that has been the FPL Scope podcast. I've talked for about an hour now by myself. Quite happy about that. Being able to do that without stuttering too much and without trying to think about what I'm going to say too much as well. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you made it all the way through even. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe if you haven't already. And with that, I thank you for this week's content in FPL. Going to be back next week, obviously, with all the usual content. And maybe I'll do an interesting video on Tuesday as well. We usually do a bit of a different type of video. But maybe I'll do something interesting for those for that day. But we'll see. Either way. But thank you for watching, as always. And goodbye.